In Yunjing in 2035, there is always a sense of pressure in the air that cannot be described. Lin Hao sat in the lattice in the office, staring at the unfinished report on the computer screen, and his brain had long since disappeared outside the window. The sky along the coast, the super city, has been gray in recent months, as if it was being pressed by something, and occasionally you can see a few strange flashes, like cracks, spreading across the sky. My colleagues all said it was light pollution or the side effects of some new technology, but Lin Hao always felt that he was not in a relationship, and he seemed to have a string in his heart. "Brother Hao, are you in a daze again?" Xiaoli, who was next to him, came over, holding a cup of instant coffee in his hand, smiling a little heartlessly. "If you don't get the report for this quarter, the boss will be ready." Lin Hao pulled the corner of his mouth and replied, "It's done right away, don't urge it." But the mouse in his hand didn't move, and his eyes couldn't help but glance out the window. The flash appeared again. This time it became even more obvious, like a knife directly opening a hole in the sky, with blue and purple light coming out, as if something was about to be diamond from it. "Bored, have you seen it?" Lin Hao stood up suddenly and pointed out the window and shouted. Xiaoli was stunned for a moment, looked at his hand, but didn't see anything, and curled his lips and said, "Brother Hao, have you been under too much pressure recently?" "There is nothing outside the window." Lin Hao was browsing and was thinking about something. The lights in the office suddenly flashed for a few moments, and then the entire building shook, as if something had hit him hard. The computer screen was instantly blacked, and the water cup on the table rolled directly to the ground and broke. Screams and sensations came one after another, and some of their colleagues darted under the table, and some ran directly to the door. "It's an earthquake! Run!" Xiaoli shouted, pulling Lin Hao out. Lin Hao's brain was in chaos, and he felt his heart beating as fast as if it was about to explode. The earth under his feet seemed to be alive, shaking constantly. He followed the crowd and ran out of the office building. As soon as he arrived on the street, he was so shocked by the scene in front of him that he could not speak. The sky collapsed. This was the first thought that emerged from Lin Hao's brain. Yunjing's sky seemed to be torn apart, and countless huge cracks were ripped in the air, and blue-purple light sprayed out of the cracks, flowing down like blood. The air around the crack was twisted, and a low sound of snarling birds was roaring. On the far sea, a huge black wave was rushing over at a speed visible to the naked eye, several 10 meters high, as if it was about to swallow the entire city. "Hi-hoo! Run high!" Someone screamed, and the crowd on the street exploded in an instant, pushing and crying to escape. Lin Hao was so stubborn that he was almost unstable by the crowd. He subconsciously wanted to run home, but when he thought about it, his home was in a small coastal area, and now he was just a death sentence in the past. He gritted his teeth and decided to follow the flow of people to run to the high-level buildings in the city center. But before he had run out for a few hundred meters, the ground under his feet suddenly shook violently again, and the cement boards on the road cracked directly, as if they were broken from the bottom. Lin Hao didn't stand firmly and fell into a crack. His ears were full of screams and explosions, his eyes turned dark and he couldn't see anything. When he opened his eyes again, his body was covered in dust and his head was also damaged. There was a dead silence around, and the streets that were just crowded with people were now left with only walls and walls. The skyscrapers far away were crooked, as if they were about to collapse at any time. The cracks in the sky were still there, and the blue-purple light shone down like a waterfall, illuminating the entire city as if it had been buried in a strange dream. Lin Hao got up and checked his body, found that there was nothing serious except for a few injuries. He tried to shout a few times, but there was no one around him, only the voice was yelling in the ruins, carrying an inexplicable chill. His heart sank, realizing that he might be trapped in this ruin. "Is anyone? Help!" he shouted at the top of his throat, but the sound was quickly swallowed by wind. Lin Hao gritted his teeth and decided to find a safe place first. He lifted a broken steel tendon on the ground as a weapon and began to grop in the ruins. Not long after he left, he suddenly heard a low response, as if something was crawling under the ruins. Lin Hao felt tight in his heart, held the tendons in his hand, and leaned over carefully. The sound is getting closer and closer, accompanied by a click sound that looks like a friction between bones, making people's skin numb. He hid behind a half-collapsed wall and looked out and almost screamed without awesome. It was a monster. It can only be described as a monster. Its body looks human, but its limbs are twisted like spiders, and its skin appears to be a strange gray-green color, as if it has been corrupted by something. Its eyes are pure white, without pupils, and its mouth is full of sharp fangs, and it is chewing on a corpse with its head lowered. Lin Hao's stomach swelled, and the swelling urge was swelling and slowly retreated. But his feet accidentally stepped on a piece of gravel, and a click sound was heard. The monster raised his head suddenly and looked at him. The two rolled eyes stared at Lin Hao, as if he could see through his soul directly. "Mom!" Lin Hao shouted softly, turned around and ran away. The monster let out a sharp roar, and limbs on all sides, snatching over like a wild animal. Lin Hao ran desperately, but the ruins under his feet said that he had to cut it off if he couldn't run a few steps. The monster was so fast that it was about to snatch his back, and a sudden buzz sound in his brain, as if something was blowing open. As time seemed to slow down, Lin Hao could clearly feel the air behind him trembling, and every movement of the monster became unusually clear. He could even hear a low-frequency wave, coming from the cracks in the sky, like some kind of warning. He subconsciously slammed to the left, and almost at the same time, the monster was swept away, grabbing his claws hard on the ground, leaving several deep scratches. Lin Hao rolled around, and when he got up, he found that he was not injured. There was still that strange feeling in his brain, as if something was guiding him so that he could sense the danger in advance. He didn't have time to think carefully, and while the monster had not reacted, he picked up the steel and smashed it into its brain. With a bang, the monster was smashed and roared, but it didn't fall down. Lin Hao knew that he was not the opponent, so he turned around and ran away. This time he ran more directional, and he could always listen some delicate sounds in his brain in advance, telling him which road is safe and which road is dangerous. After running for more than 10 minutes, he finally got rid of the monster and hid in a half-collapsed commercial field. The mall was in a mess, the shelves were tilted, and the ground was full of broken glass and scattered goods. Lin Hao found a corner to sit down, gasping for breath, and was still very scared. "What the hell is going on?" he muttered in a low voice, his brain full of just known pictures. Those crackers, the monster, and the inexplicable perception ability, everything was like a dream, but the pain and the dust full of hands reminded him that everything was real. Just as he was trying to figure out his thoughts, a slight response suddenly came from the depths of the business, as if someone was moving. Lin Hao immediately became alert, held his steel tendons tightly, and slowly touched the direction of the sound. He walked through several collapsed shelves and finally saw a figure, a woman, squatting on the ground, searching for something. She was wearing a torn sweater and her hair was terrible behind her brain. She looked like she was only over 20 years old and her face was covered in dust, but her eyes were unusually focused. She was holding a small instrument in her hand, as if measuring some data, and did not notice Lin Hao's approaching at all. "Who is there?" Lin Hao asked in a low voice, and the tendons in his hand were already lifted up. The woman was startled and turned over, and the instrument in her hand almost fell to the ground. When she saw Lin Hao, she was stunned for a moment, then showed a tough smile, and raised her hands and said, "Don't be tight, I'm not a bad person. My name is Ye Xiaoran, I'm an imager." "Among the ejaculationists?" Lin Hao glanced at his forehead and did not put down the weapon in his hand. "Are you still studying the weather like this? It's all over the place. Are you not going to have your life here?" Ye Xiao smiled bitterly and pointed to the instrument in his hand. "I'm not studying the weather, I'm studying the cracks. Do you see the things in the sky? They are not natural phenomena, and the energy waves emitted in them are completely inconsistent with known physical laws. I doubt there is a bigger secret behind all this." Lin Hao heard it halfway through or not, but he didn't think he was ruthless and slowly put down his steel. He walked a few steps closer and asked, "Do you know what happened to those monsters?" "I was almost killed." Yi suddenly pointed a little, and his face became solemn. I guess it was the energy of the cleft that affected the biological genes and caused some organisms to undergo abnormal changes. This energy, it can not only destroy, it can also be created, or, to say, distorted. I monitored some abnormal data before the disaster broke out, but unfortunately no one believed me. Lin Hao was silent for a while, and felt indescribable in his heart. He remembered the inexplicable perception ability just now, and hesitated for a moment, and asked, "Will the energy fluctuations you said affect people as well?" I just seemed able to feel the danger in advance, like something in my brain reminding me. Ye's eyes lit up and hurriedly walked over and looked up and down at Lin Hao. "Are you really? This may be the direct effect of cracking energy on human bodies. If you can study it clearly, you may find a way to deal with the disaster. What's your name? Do you want to cooperate with me?" Lin Hao was a little uncomfortable being stared at by her, and he said, "My name is Lin Hao, an ordinary office worker. There is nothing special. As for cooperation, I just want to survive now and find a safe shelter. Do you have a place to go?" Ye suddenly clicked the head and put away the instrument and said, "I heard that there is a temporary shelter in the suburbs of the city. It was built by some survivors. The ones on the head seem to be retired soldiers, called Zhangzishan. They gather resources there to get to the monsters. If you want to, we can go there together." Lin Hao thought about it and thought that he had no ability to survive alone, so he pointed out, "Okay, let's go together. But I'll say first, I'm not a hero, and I may run faster than you when I encounter danger." Ye Xiaoran laughed and patted his shoulder. "Don't worry, I don't expect you to be a hero either. We help each other, and living is the most important thing." The two of them cleaned up briefly, and Ye Xiao found some cans and mineral water from the mall. Lin Hao picked up several tools and weapons that were still considered solid. Before leaving, Lin Hao glanced at the cracks in the sky again, and the blue-purple light was still flowing, as if mocking the insignificance of humanity. He had a premonition in his heart that the disaster was hard to end, and it might even be just beginning. They walked out of the business and came to a dead city. In the ruins far away, you can occasionally hear the monsters' growls, as if reminding them that this land is no longer human. Lin Hao tightened the tendons in his hand and followed Ye toward the suburbs. They don't know what is waiting for, but at least, they are not alone now. Lin Hao and Ye suddenly left the broken mall, and the gravel road under their feet made a shattered sound under their trampling. The sky outside was still in the strange shape, the cracks were like scars, and the blue-purple light kept flashing, as if it was whispering some ominous predictions. There was a burnt smell in the air, mixed with the fishy atmosphere of the sea, making people feel swelling in their chests. Lin Hao tightened the tendons in his hands and looked around his eyes, fearing that some monster would emerge from the ruins. The shelter in the suburbs is northwest, about 10 kilometers away. Ye Xiao walked down and looked at the instrument in his hand. A simple map was displayed on the screen, marking their destinations in red. "If it's smooth, you can get there before dark. But we have to be careful, the road may be uneven." "What does uneasy mean?" Lin Hao glanced at her, with a little worried in his temperament. "Are you talking about monsters or something?" Ye Xiao raised his head and looked at him, then hesitated for a moment before saying, "There must be monsters, but not just monsters. I heard that some survivors are not very friendly. They will lose resources and even do not use means to survive. So we have to be low-key and don't cause trouble." Lin Hao clicked a little, and his heart was a little bit furious. He is an ordinary office worker who has never used the chain several times. Now he wants to survive in a place like this, and just thinking about it makes his head feel numb. But when he looked at Yi on his face and realized it was true, he couldn't say anything, so he could only follow him with his head. The two of them walked through several unrecognizable streets. Most of the buildings on the road were half collapsed. Occasionally, they could see several flattened cars, and there was nothing inside. I don't know where the original owner went. The sea level far away can still see the huge black waves rising from time to time, as if reminding them that this city has been abandoned by nature. After about an hour of leaving, Lin Hao suddenly stopped and glanced around with his eyebrows. The familiar feeling appeared in the brain again, like a low wave, transmitted from the cracks in the sky, carrying a warning meaning. He held the steel tightening and said to the leaves with a low voice, "I don't feel very aligned when there is something nearby." He was stunned for a moment, then stopped immediately, and asked in a low voice, "Are you sure? Is it a monster or a human? It's not good to say, but it's definitely not a good thing." Lin Hao pointed to a small alley on the left, and the sound was lowered. "The sound comes from there, let's walk." He suddenly pointed at the head, and the two immediately changed direction and walked towards another road. But before I walked far, a sudden burst of footsteps came from the alley, followed by a few growls, as if something was chasing. Lin Hao felt nervous, and he pulled Ye Xiao and hid behind the overturned car on the road, holding his breath and looking towards the alley. Sometimes, several figures stumbled out of the alley, covered in blood and mud, and looked like they were so stubborn. They were holding simple weapons, some were iron tubes, some were broken knives, and one of them was carrying a bulging backpack, as if it was full of something. Following them tightly was a monster that Lin Hao had seen before, with twisted limbs and his gray and green skin looking particularly stunning in the sun. "Run! That thing is catching up!" One of them shouted at the top of his lungs, but his companions could no longer run, and fell directly to the ground with a slight drop. The monster let out a sharp roar, and rushed over, grabbing the man's back with his claws, and the blood spurted out in an instant. Lin Hao was shocked to see it, subconsciously shrank his neck, and said to Yi quietly, "Let's not worry, let's run while we are now." Yi suddenly bit his lip, and there was a flash of hesitation in his eyes, but he finally got the head. The two quietly rolled from the back of the car, moving towards the distance, without making any sounds. But just as they were about to leave the video line, the group of people with backpacks suddenly looked at them, their eyes lit up, and they shouted, "Hey! There is someone there! Help!" Lin Hao secretly cried out in his heart, knowing that he could not hide. He turned around and saw that the monster had solved the man who had fallen to the ground and turned toward them, as fast as a wind. The remaining survivors also ran towards them, their faces filled with shock and hope. "Mom, I can't run away." Lin Hao gritted his teeth and stood up, picked up his steel tendons and pulled out his defense posture, and shouted to Yi, "You find a place to hide, I'll try to hold it." "Are you crazy? Don't you say you're not a hero?" Yi was so anxious that he stomped his feet, but he quickly hid behind a half-collapsed wall, holding a fire axe that was rolling from the maul in his hand, ready to support at any time. Lin Hao didn't have time to say back, but the monster had already caught his eyes, and his claws were holding fishy winds at his brain. The volatility in his brain resounded again, as if telling him the attacking attack. He flashed his body, barely dodged his claws, and then a tendon hit the monster's face, making a bang sound. The monster was smashed and roared with anger, but did not fall down, but instead rushed towards Lin Hao even more crazy. Lin Hao retreated and relied on his inexplicable perception to avoid it, but he knew that he was not the opponent of this thing at all and could not delay it for long. At this moment, Yi suddenly rushed out of the side, and the fire axe in his hand slashed hard on the monster's back leg, making a heavy thrust sound. The monster was in pain and turned toward her. Lin Hao took advantage of the opportunity to hit another tendon on its brain, and finally let it fall down. After twitching for a few seconds, it stopped moving. Lin Hao was gasping for a long time, his legs were a little soft, and he turned to Yi and said, "Didn't you just tell me not to be a hero? Why did you come on yourself?" Yi suddenly gave him a blank look and wiped the sweat on his head. "I don't want to be a hero, I just see that you are about to be torn, so I can't stand by and watch." The two were saying that the survivors had already run away, and the man with a backpack on his head said gratefully, "Thank you, if you hadn't taken action, we would have been done. My name is Wang Liang, these are my companions." Lin Hao clicked a little, and there was nothing good to look on his face. "Thank you, you almost brought us in with you when you shouted that way. What was in your backpack?" It looked quite valuable. Wang Liang's face stiffened and he hurriedly kept his backpack behind him. Qian smiled and said, "It's nothing, it's just something to eat, drink, and it's a blessing. We are also trying to survive, there's nothing else." Ye Xiao suddenly sniffed at Naomei, obviously not believing it, but he didn't ask, just said, we are going to the shelter in the suburbs. Where are you? If you go together, don't cause trouble. Wang Liang was busy and patted his chest to guarantee, don't worry, we will never drag our back legs. We have also heard of the shelter and we happen to go together. Lin Hao was not very happy, but seeing that there were many people on the other side, he and Ye were still weak in their strength, so it was hard to refuse directly, so he could only reluctantly agree. So the team fell together at this moment and continued to move towards the suburbs. With a new companion, I didn't encounter monsters on the way, but Lin Hao always felt that there was nothing wrong with him. Although Wang Liang's eyes were polite, his eyes always had a slight smell, especially the backpack. They regarded it more than life, and even held it while resting, as if they were afraid that someone would stolen. In the evening, the crowd finally approached the suburbs, and could see a deserted industrial area far away. Several old factories were temporarily converted into shelters, and the surrounding area was surrounded by wire nets and waste boards, which looked quite solid. It seems that's it. Ye Xiao relaxed his voice and said to Lin Hao in a low voice, I hope the people here can accept us. Lin Hao clicked a little, but the waves in his brain suddenly became resounding again. This time it was not a crack from the sky, but closer, as if warning him about the danger in the shelter. He sniffed his eyebrows, saying nothing, but just silently tightened the tendons in his hand. Shogun soon discovered them, and took a gun and asked, Stop. Where are you? Number of people and purpose. Ye soon walked forward, raised his hands and said that he had no enemies. He said calmly, We are survivors who escaped from the city center, with a total of 7 people. They want to join the shelter and seek shelter. We have our own assets and will not eat and drink for nothing. Shouwei looked them up and down, his eyes stayed on Wang Liang's backpack for a while, and then he pointed, Okay, come in. But let's talk first, you have to hear our heads' arrangements after going in, otherwise don't blame us for being rude. The crowd followed the guard into the shelter, which was much hotter than imagined. There were about a few dozen people, some repairing walls, some distributing food, and several children ran to the open space. Although the environment was bitter, it was at least a bit popular. Lin Hao felt a little relaxed, but the uneasy feeling still did not dissipate. Not long after, a tall man walked over, full of face and cheeks, wearing old military uniforms, and was very energetic. At first glance, he was the head here. He glanced at Lin Hao and the others, and said in a low voice, My name is Zhang Zhishan, the responsible person here. Since you have come, you have to abide by the rules. Are there any problems with material resources and unified management of work and unified distribution of work? Yi suddenly said he had no opinion, and Lin Hao didn't say anything, but Wang Liang was a little displeased and muttered in a low voice, What are you going to hand over to the things? We're going to give you what we're going to give you. Zhang Zishan sneered and narrowed his eyes, Don't want to? Then roll out. There are many monsters outside, so you can choose them. I don't care about people here. Wang Liang was so devastated that although he was unwilling to give up, he still handed over his backpack. Zhang Zishan was checked and found that in addition to some cans and water, there were also a few crystals emitting faint blue light, which looked like something that was ripped from the crack. He sniffed his eyebrows and said nothing, but asked people to put away the things and arranged for Lin Hao and the others to rest. As night fell, several bonfires were spotted in the shelter, and the dim flames reflected the light and darkness of people's faces. Lin Hao and Yi were sitting in the corner, discussing their next plans in a low voice. It looks safe here, but I always think it's wrong. Lin Hao rubbed his sunny hole. Although the waves in his brain were a little weaker, they still kept rising. I think Zhang Zishan is not a fuel-efficient light, and Wang Liang and others are hiding things that are not old. He suddenly clicked a little, holding the instrument in his hand, and some data were displayed on the screen. I just measured it. The fluctuation of cracking energy nearby is very strong, maybe because the cracking area is not far away from the shelter. Those crystals. I suspect they are crystals of cracking energy, and they may have special effects. Special function? Lin Hao raised his eyebrows. You said, can you turn people into monsters? It's possible, and it may have some effect. Ye Xiao suppressed a low voice. I heard that some people will gain some abilities after touching the crack energy, such as your perception. If you can study it clearly, it may help us fight monsters or even close the crack. Lin Hao heard it and felt a little moved, but he didn't say much. He knew that although Ye Xiaoran had a good idea, the risk of studying these things was too great in this environment, and it might cause trouble. As we were chatting, Zhang Zishan suddenly walked over. His face was not very good-looking, so he asked, I just heard someone say, you have encountered a monster on the way, and you can still fuck it? With this ability, why didn't you say it earlier? Lin Hao's heart skipped a beat. Knowing that this was too late, he could only say with a stern head, the energy is so strong, it's no big deal. We just want to find a safe place and don't want to cause trouble. Zhang Zishan stared at him for a while, and there was a burst of excitement in his eyes. He pointed at him, okay, since you have the ability, don't waste money. Tomorrow, I will take my team to search for resources near the schizophrenic area, and you will go with you. Don't refuse, this is the rule. Lin Hao and Ye Xiao looked at each other and saw helplessness in each other's eyes. They knew that this was not negotiation, but an order. But they also know that in this place, refusing to make their situation worse. Okay, let's go. Yi suddenly gritted his teeth and replied. Zhang Haishan sat down at the comfort of the spot and turned away. Lin Hao looked at his back and felt even more uneasy. It was late at night, and the people in the sheltering station were sleeping, only the bonfire was still crackling. Lin Hao leaned against a wall and closed his eyes and pretended to sleep. He couldn't calm down no matter how hard he was. He could feel that the cracks in the sky seemed to be alive, constantly emitting some low-frequency waves, as if calling something. And tomorrow, they will face the unknown territory, and no one knows what will happen. Lin Hao leaned against the cold wall and closed his eyes without any sleepiness. The bonfire in the shelter has burned to a few faint mars, and the night wind blows over it, bringing a biting chill. The cracks in the sky still radiated blue-purple light, like a huge eye looking down at the broken earth. The low-frequency fluctuations in the brain are strong and weak, as if reminding him that tomorrow's trip to the crack will never be simple. He opened his eyes quietly and glanced at the leaves beside him. She was looking down at the instrument in her hand, and the glimmer of the screen reflected on her focused face. You still don't sleep? Lin Hao asked in a low voice, his throat feeling a little sad because of fatigue. Ye Xiao raised his head and glanced at him, slamming his head. I can't sleep. The energy fluctuations around here are getting stronger and stronger. I suspect there is a big move in the crack area. Tomorrow we have to be extra careful, that man Zhang Zishan. I always think he hasn't said anything. Lin Hao clicked a little, and he had the same doubts in his heart. Although Zhang Zishan looks like he is thinking about everyone on the surface, the things hidden in his eyes are not simple. These newcomers were directly arranged to search for resources in the crack area, which was said to be rules, but no matter how they looked, they were like cannon fodder to use them as path-seeking. No matter what, we have to be careful. Lin Hao whispered, if the situation is not right, don't worry about the rules and save your life. Yi suddenly whispered, put away the instrument and closed his eyes against the wall. Lin Hao didn't say anything anymore, and his brain began to count tomorrow's actions. He knew that his perception ability was the biggest trump card at present, and he might be able to save his life when he was in the key moment. As the sky was dawn, a low voice sounded like a signal of some kind of convening. Lin Hao and Ye Xiao packed up their belongings and gathered with a team led by Zhang Zishan. There were more than 10 people in the team. In addition to them, there were also a few survivors who looked strong and powerful. Wang Liang was also on the list, with an unwilling expression on his face. Zhang Zishan stood in front, holding a modified step gun in his hand, and said loudly, today's mission is very simple. There is a scrapped experiment station near the crack area, which contains a lot of crystals of crack energy. Our goal is to bring them back. These things can help us strengthen defense and may even develop ways to fight against monsters. Do you understand? Everyone should be pointing it, but Lin Hao's heart skipped a beat. Experimental site? It's not simple to hear, and the crack area is originally the monster's nest. Who knows if there will be greater trouble? He glanced at Ye Xiao and found that she was also browsing, clearly full of doubts about this task. The team quickly set off and headed towards the crack zone. The area in the suburbs of Yunjing has long been destroyed by heaven and beyond recognition. The road pits are said to be collapsed factories and trees uprooted by trees on both sides. The cracks in the sky became denser and denser, and the blue-purple light almost formed, like some ominous sign. The volatility in Lin Hao's brain became stronger and stronger, almost making him dizzy. He gritted his teeth and held his back, and his eyes were always paying attention to the static surrounding him. After about 2 hours of walking, the team finally approached the core belt of the rift zone. There was a pungent smell in the air, like sulfur mixed with metal smell, making people feel swelling in their chest. A broken building can be seen from a distance. Most of the steel-strength concrete outer wall has collapsed, revealing the complex pipelines and equipment inside, which really looks like a test station. Some blue light flash crystals were scattered on the surrounding ground, like energy crystals sprayed from cracks. That's it. Zhang Zhishan stopped and signaled everyone to quit, divided into 2 groups. One group will search with me, and the other group will take the wind outside. Lin Hao, you and Yi will come with me. You have experience, don't let me down. Lin Hao secretly cried out in his heart, knowing that he had no choice but to follow him with his head. Ye Xiao suddenly said to him in a low voice, "Be careful, I have detected that the energy fluctuations around here are unusually strong, and maybe there is something big inside." After entering the experiment station, it was even more broken inside than outside. The corridor was full of collapsed equipment and broken glass, and some burnt marks could be seen on the walls, like a violent explosion. The energy fluctuations in the air almost made Lin Hao breathless. The sound in his brain exploded, constantly warning him that there was danger. He held the steel in his hand tightly and followed carefully behind Zhang Zishan. "Head, it seems that this place is not right," a team member said in a low voice, with a little trembling in the voice, "or let's take some crystals and leave, don't go inside." Zhang Zishan snorted coldly and said without looking back, "What are you afraid of? Crystals are second, there are more important things in it. I heard that this place used to be a secret experiment base, studying crack energy, and maybe there are techniques that can close cracks. Don't you want to hide in the ruins and live there all the time?" Lin Hao heard it and closed the crack. This sounded inconsistent with Ye Xiaoran's idea, but he always felt that Zhang Zishan had nothing to say, and there must be other cats in it. Yi was also browsing, and the data on the instrument screen in his hand jumped violently, as if he had captured some unusual signal. As I was walking, a low-pitched movement suddenly came from the corridor ahead, as if something heavy was moving. The wave in Lin Hao's brain reached the top in an instant. He suddenly grabbed Zhang Zishan and shouted in a low voice, "Something is there. Don't go forward." Zhang Zishan was stunned for a moment, and just wanted to say something. A huge monster suddenly appeared in the corridor. Its body is bigger than any monster I have ever seen before, like a mixture of humans and spiders, with a hard shell covered with 8 spike-like legs crawling on the ground, making a harsh friction sound. Its eyes were red, radiant light, and its mouth was full of sharp teeth, and it let out a deafening roar at the team. "Trough! Turn on the fire!" Zhang Zishan reacted quickly, and the starting gun was a round of bullets, but the bullet hit the monster's hard shell, leaving no white seal behind. The monster rushed over and a pointed leg pierced the chest of a team member, and the blood was sprayed all over. "Run! Run back!" Lin Hao shouted, and pulled Yi and immediately walked towards the road. Zhang Zishan gritted his teeth and fired a few more guns, but it was useless and retreated with the rest of the people. The monster was so fast that it caught up in a few steps. Another claw slapped a person, and the sound of shattering bones made people's skin numb. Lin Hao ran and relied on his perception to avoid the monster's attack, but he knew that he could not escape if he continued like this. A thought suddenly flashed in his brain, and turned to Zhang Zishan and shouted, "Turn it to the depth of the experiment station. There is an energy core there, and I might be able to blow it up." Zhang Zishan's eyes lit up and he pointed, "Okay. Come with me." he took the team to change direction and ran deeper towards the experiment station. Ye was panting heavily and said to Lin Hao in a low voice, "Are you crazy? If the energy core explodes, we can't escape. There is no other way." Lin Hao said, gritting his teeth, "If we don't fuck this, we can't live either." Several people stumbled into a huge laboratory. In the center was a core of energy radiating strong blue light, surrounded by complex instruments and pipes. The energy fluctuations emitted from the core almost suffocated Lin Hao, and the sound in his brain seemed to be screaming, warning him of the extreme danger here. "That's it!" Zhang Zishan shouted at the core, "Turn it over, and then we find a chance to blow it up." The monster quickly chased in, and its huge body almost filled the entrance to the experiment room. It roared towards its core, as if attracted by energy, completely ignoring the people around it. Lin Hao took the opportunity to pull Ye and hid behind a bunch of equipment, and Zhang Zishan took several people to try to operate the console beside him. "I found the self-destruction procedure," a team member shouted, full of surprise in his voice. "It takes 1 minute to run." Lin Hao felt nervous and knew that this was the last chance. He and Ye Xiao suddenly rushed out of their hiding place and ran towards the exit, while Zhang Zishan and others followed him. The monster seemed to have noticed the danger, and let out an angry roar, turning toward them, but at this moment, a harsh buzzing sound from the energy core, and the blue light burst into an instant, illuminating the entire laboratory as bright as white. "Don't fall!" Lin Hao shouted, fell to the ground, and used his body to protect Ye Xiaoran. The next second, a shocking explosion started, and the heat and shock waves almost drove them flying. The wall of the experiment station collapsed instantly, and countless debris were flooded. The monster's roar was completely flooded by the explosion. After everything calmed down, Lin Hao got up with his stinging sting, his body covered in dust and wounds, and his ears were still buzzing. He turned around and saw that although Ye was a wolf, he was lucky that he was not seriously injured. Zhang Zishan and several other team members also stood up, their faces full of expressions of life after the disaster. "It's done, that monster should be dead." Zhang Zishan gasped heavily, and a sense of happiness was brought to his voice. He looked around and found that the energy core had completely exploded, and the cracking energy fluctuations around him seemed to have weakened a lot. Ye immediately got up, took the instrument and took a look, and said, "The wave has indeed weakened, but the crack itself has not disappeared. This has only temporarily delayed the dissipation of the disaster, and the root problem is still there." Lin Hao clicked a little, and there was no relaxation in his heart. He could feel that although the cracks in the sky were a little more peaceful, the low-frequency waves still existed, as if they were crying out some greater storm. "Head! Look here," a team member suddenly shouted, holding a metal plate dug out of the ruins, filled with strange symbols, like some unknown language. Ye walked over and looked carefully for a while. His face became unusually solemn. "This is not human words," she said in a low voice. "I doubt that this has something to do with the origin of the cleft. Maybe there are really plans for alien civilizations." Zhang Zishan heard it and his face darkened. After a while, he was silent. He said, "No matter what it is not the time for research. Let's go back to the shelter first, take this back, and analyze it slowly." The team, carrying the scars and fatigue of their bodies, dragged several crystals and the metal plates, and began to walk back. No more monsters were encountered on the road, but Lin Hao's uneasiness became stronger and stronger. He could feel that the metal plate was emitting a strange wave, and the energy of the crack was like a thorn, like a signal. When I returned to the shelter, it was completely dark. The survivors heard a low voice when they saw the crystals they brought back, but Lin Hao was not very happy to participate. He and Ye suddenly found a corner to sit down, discussing what they had just discovered. If it is really an alien civilization, then we are not facing a simple disaster. Ye Xiao lowered his voice, his eyes filled with grief. This may be a bigger battle, which concerns the survival of the entire human race. Lin Hao clicked a little and remembered a more uneasy name in his brain, Qinjing. This name was heard from other survivors on the road. It was said to be a crazy scientist who participated in the secret experiment of cracking energy long before the disaster broke out, and even tried to use energy to transform humans. If the rift is related to alien civilization, Chen Jing is likely to know more inside stories. No matter what, we have to find Chen Jing. Lin Hao said in a deep voice. He may know the truth about the crack, and even has a way to close it. Ye Xiao agreed, but there was also a flash of silence in his eyes. It can be heard that the guy is completely crazy. His men are all transformed monsters. Getting closer to him is like sending death. That's a test, too. Lin Hao gritted his teeth. I can't hide here all the time, and wait for the next disaster to swallow us all. At this moment, Zhang Zishan walked over, holding the metal plate in his hand, his face as if it was about to drip. He looked at Lin Hao and Yi Ran and said, "You, come with me. I have something to ask you." Lin Hao felt nervous and knew that he could not hide from this. He and Ye Xiaoran looked at each other and silently followed Zhang Zishan into a temporary tent. The light in the tent was dim, and only a broken oil lamp shook the faint light. Zhang Zishan put the metal plate on the table, turned his head and looked at them, and said in a low voice, "How much do you know about this?" Yi suddenly slammed his head and said honestly, "It's the first time we've seen it, but from the symbols and energy waves, it may be related to the source of the crack." "What are your traces?" Zhang Zishan was silent for a while, as if he had made up some decisions, and finally said, "In fact, I knew that cracking was not simple. Before the disaster broke out, I heard some news in the army that the government and some scientists were studying cracking energy, and even trying to connect with a certain non-human existence. Chen Jing was one of them." Lin Hao was shocked when he heard this and couldn't help asking, "Then why didn't you say it earlier? What's the use of telling us these now?" Zhang Zishan smiled bitterly and shook his head. "I said it earlier. Do you believe it? And I'm not sure. It was not until today when I saw this board that I realized that things might be more serious than I thought." Chen Jing, now in an underground base deep in the ruins of Yunjing, said that he had been completely invaded by the cracking energy and turned into something half human and half miracle. "If you really want to find the answer, you have to face him." Ye Xiao suddenly snarled his eyebrows and knocked his fingers on the tabletop unconsciously. "What about you? What about you? What are you going to do? Go with us, or continue to guard the shelter?" Zhang Zishan was silent for a moment, and finally said, "I will bring you a few trustworthy people. But let me first say, this is not a heroic action, it is purely for survival. If Chen Jing really has the ability to close the crack, then we have to pay." Lin Hao clicked a little and knew in his heart that this trip would definitely be a life and death. Chen Jing's underground base sounds like a monster, and the guy itself is an uncertain blowout. Who knows what will happen? The night became darker and deeper, and the people in the shelter continued to sleep, and only a few guards were still patrolling the rules. Lin Hao leaned against the edge of the tent and looked at the hidden cracks in the sky, but the volatility in his brain still did not stop. He knew that this battle was not over, destroying the energy core was just the beginning, and the real challenge was still ahead. "Let's rest, tomorrow will be on the way." Yi suddenly patted his shoulder and said in a low voice, "No matter what, we are at least still alive, with hope." Lin Hao smiled hard, closed his eyes and pretended to sleep, but he couldn't calm down no matter how hard he felt. He could feel that the energy of the crack was like a huge net, covering the entire earth, and these survivors were just stinging holes in the net. What will be waiting for them at Chen Jing's base? What is the truth behind the crack? These problems pressed his heart like a heavy stone, making him breathless. Along the way, a low voice came from the crack, as if telling the arrival of the next storm. Lin Hao clenched his fists and told himself that no matter how dangerous it was ahead, he would go on for himself and for those who were stalking in the ruins.